Hi, in this lecture we will create some real-world examples of the triggers. I will create these triggers as how we used in our work before. There will be two examples. The first one will be using the sequences with our triggers, and the second one will be creating and maintaining log tables with the triggers. So let's start with the first one. In a real work, most of the times, you use sequences or some calculations to assign new values for the primary key values. Of course, there are some other ways too, but most of the times, the programmers use sequences with triggers to assign new values to the primary keys. Because primary keys must be unique and we don't let the users to write primary keys manually. Instead, we use this way. So let's start with creating the sequence. We will work on the department's copy table. So let's start with checking the table first. Select all the columns from department's copy. As we can see from the output, it seems the department ID column is set with the number values increasing by 10. And let's check the last department ID column. The last department ID value is 280. So our sequence must start creating numbers from 290 and continue increasing by 10. So let's create our sequence now. Create sequence dep copy, for example, and start with 290 and increment by 10. This is enough for the sequence specifications. Our sequence will create the first value as 290 and the next values will be 10 more of the previous one. I explained sequences detailed in our SQL courses. If you cannot remember, you can check from there if you have that course. If not, you can check from Oracle's documentation. Great, now it's time to create our trigger. Our trigger will assign the next value of our sequence to the department ID column of our department's copy table. So let's do it. First, let's open up a new worksheet. So we write create or replace trigger trg before insert depth copy. I recommend you to give meaningful names for your triggers. You can have your own naming standards, but my suggestion is specify the object type first. I will write as trg here. Then the type of our event, it is before insert here, then the name. Now, we need to write the timing and event of that trigger. Since we will assign new values for the primary keys, the event must be an insert. And the timing must be before because this is an insert event trigger. So you cannot change the new values of after insert triggers. So I write before insert now. Before insert on department's copy. This will be a row level trigger because it must work for each row in our insert statement. So we need to write for each row here. For each row. And our begin keyword. Now, here, in our trigger body, we will assign our new value to our department ID column. To do that, we have two options. The first one is calculating without using the sequence, because we know that a sequence does not guarantee you that the values will be sequential. Because if someone else queries or uses the sequence, it will be incremented even if you don't use that value in your department ID column. So this may cause unintentional results. But if you care that it must be sequential, you can calculate the next value in here and assign the calculated value. If you do like that, you guarantee that it will be sequential. But this time, you may fall into mutating table error. You will see what is mutating table errors in the next lectures. So we will not do that here. The second way is using the sequence with the select into clause. If your database is 11G or earlier, you have to use this method. Let me show you how to do that. Select sequence depth copy dot next val into our new dot department ID and from deal. If you are working on a real work, you may see some codes like that in your trigger. This is a valid usage. But with starting from 12C, you can use the sequence with an easier way. You can directly assign your sequence to a column easily. Let me show you. New dot department ID is equal to our sequence dot next val. Let me copy that. And our end keyword. But using both is not true because you will iterate your sequence 2 times. It's not true. So let's go with the first one. Great. Now we are ready to compile our trigger. So let's do it. Perfect. Now let's test it. Insert into departments copy and our columns department name, manager ID, and location ID. And values, security, and for the manager ID 200, and for the location ID I write 1700. As you can see, we did not write the department ID column because this column will be filled by our trigger. So now let's run it. Now let's check our table. As you can see, our trigger assigned the value with using our sequence value. This method is used so often in a real work. And now you know how to do that. Great. Now let's make our new example. This example is about maintaining an audit log table for our actual tables. Again, we will use the department's copy table. With this trigger, we will be able to track all the changes of that table. In a real work, this is a common usage because most of the times you will see that you will be asked like, who did this update and when? Or something like that. So you need to be able to answer to these questions of your managers. To be able to do that, you need to have your audit log tables. Your company can do that by buying some external tools, or your manager may want from you to do that. To do that, you need to create your log tables and log triggers to keep all the changes of the actual table. So first, let's create our log table for our department's copy table. So let's delete all these first. The log tables must have the same specifications with columns of the base tables. This is important because if the value you entered exceeds the length of the columns of your log table, the trigger will raise an exception and this will prevent you to do the modifications of the actual table. So let's first describe our table and write all the columns based on that. Describe department's copy. Great. Now let's start creating our table. Create table log department's copy. You will most probably write your log table names like that. You will write log at first or at the end and your actual table's name. But you can type different, of course. You can write whatever you want. Great. Now let's write the user, date of the modifications, and the DML type columns first, because with these columns, we will be able to track the user who made the modification, when he or she did it, and what is the type of that DML operation. So we write log user, it is varchar2, let's say 30, and log date, it is date, and DML type, it is varchar2 let's say 10. Now, here we write the columns of the actual table. You can write some or all of the columns here, but be sure that the data types must match and must be equal or greater at the size. Here, there can be different types of logging styles. I will use old and new values in the same table. But I have seen different types of logging styles too. You can create your own style if you are the creator of your company's logging style. If not, you need to obey the rules of your company. Great. Now let's write the other columns. Old department ID. It is number 4. As you can see, I'm checking the length from here. And new department ID. It is number 4 again. And old department name. It is varchar2 30. And new department name. It is varchar2 30 again. And old manager ID. It is number 6. And new manager ID. It is number 6 again. And old location ID. It is number 4. And new location ID. It is number 4 again. Now let's run this code. Perfect. Our log table is created successfully. Now it's time to create our trigger on our actual table to insert all the modifications into our log table for each DML operations. Create or replace trigger trg departments copy log. Our trigger will be after insert or update or delete on our departments copy table. I choose after because there is no need to make the insert and roll back that table if the user cannot make the insert successfully. But this is just for the performance. Even if it is inserted with the before trigger, it will be automatically rolled back on any error. So if we set it as after trigger, if any error occurs in the actual table, this trigger will not be executed. So it increases the performance. Besides, if you set the primary key value with a before insert trigger, this primary key creating trigger may run before our log trigger. So this time you will not be able to get the primary key value. It will be null since it has not created yet by its trigger. So I recommend you to create it as an after insert trigger. Great, now let's write it. After insert or update or delete on departments copy. This will work for each row. So we will write for each row here. Now we will declare a variable to keep the DML types. It is just for an ease. Declare vDML type varchar2 10 and our begin keyword. Now here we will assign the event type of our variable so that we will be able to write only one insert statement. I use this variable because I want to store the event type within the log table too. So let's write it. If inserting, then let me copy the variable name. Our vDML type is equal to insert. Else if updating, then our vDML type is equal to update. Else if deleting, then our VDML type is equal to delete. End if. Now we can write our insert statement. I will insert all the changes into the log table so that I can see all the changes in one table with old and new values side by side. This is a common usage. Let's continue that. Insert into log departments copy. Values, user, sysdate, and VDML type. Old.department ID and new.department ID. And old.department name and new.department name. And old.manager ID and new.manager ID. And old.location ID and new.location ID. And our AND keyword. Great, now let's compile our trigger. Alright, now let's make some DML operations and check the log table then. First, let's add a new row into the base table. Insert into departments copy department name, manager ID, location ID, and values, let's say cybersecurity, and 100 and 1700. Since the previous trigger assigns the department ID column, I omitted it. Alright, now let's make the insert. Great, now let's query from our log table. Select all the columns from log departments copy. As you can see, we stored all the old and new values of that action. With this row, we can simply say that the user HR did an insert at that time. Since this is an insert, the old values are null. So now let's make an update then. Update departments copy. Let me copy that. Set manager ID is equal to 200, where department name is equal to cyber security. Now let's run it. And now let's check the log table again. As you can see, this time we have the old and new values. We can easily see from this row that the user HR changed the manager ID of this department from 100 to 200. By the way, this log date includes all the minutes, seconds, etc. If you see only the date, it is because of the configurations of your SQL developer. You can set it as including the minutes, seconds, etc. Or you can get this line with a toString function. Great. Now let's delete this row and check again. Let me copy that and write delete from departments copy and where clause. Now let's run it. And now check the log table again. As you can see, this time the new values are null because this is a delete operation. I have mentioned about that before. Great. Now let's roll back them all and see what happens. And now let's run our query again. As you can see, all the log records are gone. Because as we rolled back all the changes, that means we did not do any change on the actual table. So nothing to log. If you want to store it, you can do some other actions like committing it, etc. But this is not our subject for now. So why did all the changes go? Because Oracle keeps all the changes along with the session. So if you roll back, all the changes that you did in your session will all be rolled back, whether they are in different tables or not. This is not about the triggers. This is about Oracle's data integrity and transaction control rules. Perfect. In this lesson, you saw two different real-world usages of DML triggers. You can do these with different ways, of course. But these are the common usages, and you will face these ones or pretty similar ones in your real work. Alright, this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lectures.